Welcome, everyone. My name is Dave Holman. I'm a member of the Greater Education Council of Connecticut. The GECC has as its mission to facilitate, coordinate, and communicate a united effort to address the various issues facing our state, our country, and our communities. Our thought is that there's lots of organizations around Connecticut fighting the various battles, but if we all work together, some of these issues lend themselves to a statewide effort. We have one of those organizations with us today, the Connecticut Convention of States. They're doing a bang-up job. They're trying to address the issues with our federal government, which is out of control. And we're happy to have with us Maureen Zola and Bill Giuffrida. And Maureen, why don't you give us a little bit about your background and how you came to be the director of the Connecticut Convention of States?
Sure. So I was never politically active at all in my life. I was a single mother of 3, so I was focused on that. And I always, which I think probably applies to a lot of people, I was kind of complacent. I thought we have this constitution, these checks and balances, and we'd always be okay. But in about 2010, I started to notice that some things were not going the way I expected, the way I was used to. And so I started paying a little attention. And then I was, like most people, complaining, yelling at the TV, and my children were teenagers, and they were probably tired of hearing me complain. So I decided to do something to see if I could volunteer somewhere. And right around the time that I made that decision, I suddenly started to see on Facebook some information about the Convention of States, and it just caught my attention, and I really didn't look any further. Something just told me this is the place. This makes sense. This is what I should do. And so, I signed the petition and offered to volunteer. And I joined the organization as what's called a district captain, which is a leadership position, but it's a local leadership position in your house district, your individual house district. For me, it's Naugatuck, District 70. The team was small at that time. This was back in 2018. And I was quickly promoted to a state leadership position, grassroots coordinator. And basically, I was recruiting and training district captains. And I did that for a time, and then our state director resigned, and our regional director, she oversees 6 or 7 states, she offered me the director position. So here I am.
Thanks for stepping up.
It was really that easy. I had been, apparently, unbeknownst to me, I'm kind of a take charge person. I was already doing some of the state director type duties, so it seemed natural for me to step into that position. I then did grassroots coordinator and state director for about 1.5 years, which was very challenging. But as the organization grows, we have more hands, and each one of us has a little bit more flexibility.
Well, I'm sure you got a lot of good volunteers like Bill. Bill, how did you come to be a member of this organization?
Well, I've been praying for the United States for a good number of years in a simple prayer. I said, Lord, turn this country for the good of thy people. And I would pray this continually. And what happened was that after the 2020 election, I was pretty downcast.
Like all of us.
It was a tough time. It was a tough time. And I began looking for what I could do for my country. And I recalled hearing on the Mark Levin program something about a Convention of States. And so I decided to go to the website to look it up. I found the website, I started reading, and I understood that this was a plan to repair America. That the founders instituted the means to make America the way it ought to be, because they foresaw a chance that it would go astray. And I was really captivated by that idea that there was a plan, and I found out that there were people in the country already working on this, and so I wanted to attach myself to that, and I I signed a petition, and as is the custom with Convention of States, they provide a return call for everyone who signs the petition. And Maureen called me up, and she asked if I was interested in volunteering. And I jumped on it. I said yes. She offered me a position to come in as a captain, a district captain, and I was reluctant to do that. Most of my life, all of my life, I've been a mechanic. I've fixed things. And it's my habit to learn how things work in order to determine what's wrong. And so I began to approach Convention of States in the same manner. How does this work? What is it like? What is it all about? And I quickly saw that there was a connection between my faith and my need to be involved in politics. And initially I was a little bit hesitant about moving into that because religion and politics are not popular conversation topics in polite company, as they say. But I saw a need there to be able to translate and help people understand that there is a hope, because that's what COS is offering to America, is a hope. And so I've become something of a historian. The team has labeled me the historian. I look at the historical details, I study history, and I've been able to determine some avenues of change within the Constitution, within the people working at it, so that it would make a difference in our country. I think we're on the right track here with the Convention of States. And that's how I joined, 3 years now.
Well, you mentioned how you were reluctant, and I was reluctant too, but then you think, if not us, who? If not now, when?
Yes.
And everybody's got to step up, because we're really at the 11th hour here. We got big problems in this country.
Yeah.
So, Maureen, tell us a little bit about the history of the Convention of States. Bill mentioned it was written into the Constitution. Speak a little bit about that.
So as the unofficial teen historian, we leave most of the actual history to him, except I will provide the background for the beginning of the Convention of States.
Yes.
Yeah. So initially, Mark Meckler, who's our CEO, he recognized there was a problem in the country, and this was back in the Tea Party days. He was an original Tea Party guy.
This went back to 2010, 2011?
Yeah, yeah. And he quickly figured out that this could not be fixed by voting in good people. Because in the Tea Party movement, there was a red wave, so to speak, and they all thought, this is great, everything's going to change, but then nothing changed. So
They were worried about it, though, and then they started going after the Tea Party members through
Yeah.
the IRS and everything. So
which I'm sure contributed to nothing changing. But the fact is that they all thought this is the answer. We voted in all these great people, and I'm sure they all were great people. Unfortunately, they get compromised when they get there.
Washington changes people.
Yeah, that's what happens. So he realized this was a structural problem, not a people problem. And so he set out to figure out a way to fix that. And he first created Citizens for Self-Governance. That's what he thought. We need to get back to self-governing. But then, well, what do we do with this? So we have this organization, but how do we go about returning to self-governance? And then he got together with Mike Ferris. They are the two co-founders. And Mike Ferris is a constitutional scholar. And he suggested Article 5, and that's where that seed was planted. There's kind of a funny story about that. At the same time that Mark and Mike were coming up with the idea of using Article 5, Mark Levin had been writing a book, which is fairly well known, the Liberty Amendments.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mark Levin started out studying this to disprove it. He'd say that it doesn't work and it's dangerous and stay away from it. However, as he researched it, he realized this is the way to fix it.
That's how I became aware of it, through Mark Levin. I always thought he was the one that came up with the idea, or was promoting the idea, but that's not the case.
Yeah, it was Providence. It was simultaneous. And so now this is me remembering the story, so I may not get it exactly 100% right. But there was a talk show that they were both on. I believe Mark was in the studio. Mark Meckler was in the studio, and Mark Levin was, remote. And Mark Meckler wanted to get Mark Levin on his side, to help promote the idea. So he wanted to talk to him about it. So his opportunity came up and he asked him a direct question about Article 5. Now, Mark Levin was in the middle of writing the book and hadn't announced it yet, and it was all hush-hush, and he was furious. He thought that Mark Meckler had found out that he was writing this book, and that's why he was asking him the question.
How about that?
So Mark says that, after he asked the question and, Mark Levin kind of, hemmed and hawed, didn't really have a good answer, wasn't expecting that question. And he said, Mark said his phone buzzed, and it was Mark Levin telling him to call him as soon as they were off the show. And so, the way Mark Meckler tells it, so he read him the Riot Act for about 5 minutes straight. And Mark Meckler said, I had no idea what he was talking about. And so then, Mark told him that, and they talked about it and laughed about it. But they had come up with the idea separately at the same exact time.
Wow,
Yeah, which is, if that's not Providence, I don't know what is.
that's really interesting. So, as a student of history, tell us about Article 5 in the Constitution.
Article 5 was one of the last issues handled by the delegation for the Constitutional Convention. 55 delegates were assigned throughout the states to appear and work on this project. It was formulated by the states. The states called for this convention. The Congress existing at the time under the Articles of Confederation later issued a letter saying that they would like them to work on it. There was some misunderstanding between some of the states, two in particular, Massachusetts and New York, thought that they were going to simply amend the Articles of Confederation. In the course of the Constitutional Convention, it was realized that there was nothing they could add to the Articles of Confederation which would make the kind of changes necessary for the continuance of the Union. And that was the, George Washington in his letter after the convention wrote that to the director of the Congress at that time, that the Union was uppermost in their thoughts, to preserve the Union between the states. The convention itself lasted from May to September. And as they approached the end, the time for signing, they were only a couple of days away from it, George Mason from Virginia stands up and says, do we think that this government that we've created on paper, if they take power away from the people, that they'll give it back to them? And everybody laughed. There were 40, at that time there were 42 delegates left. Others had left for various reasons, but there were 42 left. And they all laughed at that. They thought that was funny. And he said to them, in all seriousness, well, then we have a serious problem here, because right now, the way this is structured, only the federal government can correct the Constitution with amendments. They have the power, and they're not going to do that if they decide that they don't want to. He said that leaves out the American people. And James Madison, who was recording the event, put non-com in Latin, meaning there was no conversation. Suddenly, what was funny a few moments ago, suddenly they realized it was a great problem. They had left out the American people, and there was a long pause of silence.
It hit them.
It hit them. It hit them. Eventually, Elbridge Gerry from Massachusetts stands and offers a solution. He says, here's what we do. Him and Governor Morse from Pennsylvania, they worked together on this. And they came up with the solution of, instead of 2/3 of the House and Senate being the only means to propose an amendment to the Constitution, a convention of 2/3 of the states, called for by 2/3 of states, would produce a convention where all the states were invited. And when they produced amendments that they felt suitable for the situation, they would then be released by one vote from each state to release whatever they came up with to the states for ratification. 3/4 of the states were required to ratify it, just as it would be done if federal Congress had implemented approved the amendments themselves. So they were bypassing the Congress through a convention of states because they knew that there might come a time when the federal government would not want to correct itself.
So this is totally separate from elected members of Congress, senators, representatives, has nothing to do with them.
Federal officials.
Federal officials.
Yes. What they trusted in was that the state legislators would have the responsibility to fix the federal government. That they would then hold a convention, and they would help select the delegates to that convention, and then they would also be available for working on whether or not the issue should be ratified. So they trusted the state delegates in the hands of the people. The state delegates were closer to the people. The people had a better understanding of who they were and what they represented and how they operated. And so they really felt that by utilizing the state governments, they were encouraging the people to petition their government for the changes that were needed.
Yeah, and it's, that's the beauty of it, and that's, I think, what kind of surprises a lot of people. They kind of, seems unbelievable to them that we can do this. When I tell people, it completely bypasses the federal government. I mean, you just go right around them, and they have no way to stop it.
These elected officials, they're not gonna rein themselves in.
Exactly, never, yeah.
The interesting point is that after months of debate, this issue was not debated, and it was unanimously accepted by the remaining delegates to the convention.
Wow.
The last issue handled before it went for signatures and would then be returned to the Congress. So it was unanimously approved and not debated whatsoever. They understood that this was the way. And this was 4 years before there was a Bill of Rights. When it came to dealing with tyranny on behalf of the federal government, it was not their interest in arming the people for such a situation. They armed them instead with an opportunity to do it constitutionally and peacefully through legislation.
Has this ever been used before?
It has been
Involved
attempted.
before?
It has been attempted. There was an attempt in 1860, prior to the Civil War. They called it the Peace Convention. They tried to come up with, it was sort of a state convention because the South had already issued an item of secession. They were going to secede from the Union, and so they were represented in some cases, but not in all cases. And there was an attempt at that time to come up with constitutional amendments that would be satisfying to both sides of the slavery issue and settle the Civil War before it came to an armed conflict. It was also attempted in the early 1980s. There was a concern about the budget. They tried for a balanced budget amendment. They wanted to produce it. And I'm not certain of the timeline that they set, but they had a timeline for gathering the 2/3 states required. And what happened was when they reached the end of the timeline, they were 2 states short.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it wasn't working.
Well,
However,
I'm sorry, the timeline,
yes,
how does that work?
are you familiar with the Equal Rights Amendment?
Yes,
The Equal Rights Amendment was proposed with a 7-year timeline, that in 7 years we will have enough states ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment for it to become an amendment to the Constitution. And it was never reached. When they hit that 7-year mark, they didn't have that. Congress arbitrarily, and outside of a constitutional process, extended it for 3 more years, and they still didn't get it done. And there are still people today working on trying to get that passed, although it's been held in the courts as illegitimate, and it can no longer be ratified and approved as an amendment to the Constitution. The timeline is critical because that's what legislation is passed. When the legislatures say that there's a timeline on something, that's definite. And it's like the institutions that we have now, the federal agencies, there's no timeline on them. And that's why they never sunset. That's why we're constantly spending on them.
so is it always 7 years, or does it
No.
vary?
No, it can vary. It can vary by the legislation as it's proposed. So Convention of States learned from what happened in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And they learned that they didn't want to set a timeline like that.
So there is no timeline?
There's
on
no
it?
timeline.
Not for
on
us,
this.
no.
No, there are no timelines. And in the case of the Equal Rights Amendment, some of the states later changed their mind. And that is a questionable legal matter because nothing in the Constitution says that they have the right to thereby change it in succeeding legislatures, that the legislatures may not overturn a previous legislature in that matter. We don't know yet. The courts have to decide that. But what we have is the 1980s attempt to create a balanced budget being noticed by the Congress, so that in the 1990s, Congress itself produced an amendment, and it fell 1 vote short in 1995 of becoming a constitutional amendment.
Wow.
So they take notice. Convention of States is legitimate, it's possible, and Congress is afraid of us because we will do something that they will not do for themselves.
Well, I was going to ask this question later, but let me ask it now. Where does Biden stand on the Convention of States?
no idea.
I mean,
Yeah, he
we're-
has not publicly stated that I'm aware of. My assumption would be that he's intentionally not addressing it. You know, he certainly wouldn't want to support it, but also probably doesn't want to be seen as condemning it either.
Where does Trump stand on the convention?
As of late, we've been only a blip on the radar.
Yeah,
Since we crossed 19, now that we're halfway there, people are taking notice of the movement, and we are getting a lot of resistance.
the attacks are coming.
You know,
Yeah.
in full disclosure, I am a Trump supporter, but I would think if you guys reach out to Trump, I mean, that would be good for him and good for us as the convention.
I do believe he has not publicly made any endorsements, but I do remember recently hearing that he made a statement about it. You know, that something to the effect that it was a good idea or it was something favorable.
Mhm.
It wasn't a real strong statement and it wasn't really made public, but I remember thinking, oh, okay, so he's aware of us and, you know, he's not against it, but he's, you know, not being openly supportive.
Yeah, well, you know, with what's going on with him and how the federal, they're using the full power of the federal government against him, I would think he'd be all for this. But
Yeah, actually, I wanted.
Dave? Okay.
Okay, that's right. There was something that was put out by the national organization. It was like a general letter about the whole topic of the Convention of States and what it does and why it's so important and the problems. And so I wanted to actually just share a small part of that.
Sure.
So it starts out by saying, we the people of the Convention of States movement declare that the United States government has failed to secure the rights of the American people as called for in the Declaration of Independence. Instead, the federal government, dominated by career politicians, has usurped power from the people and the states over many decades, effectively dismantling the principles of federalism that the Founding Fathers forged into the U.S. Constitution. Such circumstances necessitate a recurrence to the principles upon which these United States were founded. Then it proceeds to go over a bunch of different issues, but there's a small summation of sort of, you know, broad view things to be considered. That all persons are created equal, that the equality of persons is derived from the equal standing of their individual rights, and these rights include life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm sure we've all heard that expression before. That these rights are not established by government. Government is established with the consent of the governed to secure these pre-existing rights. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. You know, that we don't get our rights from the government. We get our rights from our Creator.
Mhm.
And we created the government to help us secure those rights. So we're supposed to be in charge, not them.
Excuse me, Maureen, what you're reading, is that part of the proposed legislation or is that just a
This-
statement?
This is a statement, yeah, this is not in the resolution. And then finally, that whenever government fails in securing these rights, it is the duty of the people to alter the government to better secure these rights. So it's not only the duty of our legislators, you know, in our local legislators, I should say, because not only do they have the right to correct the government, it's their duty. That's how it was set up, that they would be our representatives, and that they are supposed to do as the people want, not what they think is best.
I've learned a new word lately, and it's malfeasance. So they are guilty of that, all these legislators. Yeah.
So then of all these, you know, there's 22 different specific issues that are mentioned in the letter, but just a few of my favorites.
Mhm.
The $30 trillion national debt,
Yeah,
that's a huge one.
33 now, I think.
Yes, this was from 2 years ago, yeah, last year, 33 trillion, you're right. And that doesn't include the 150 trillion in unfunded liabilities, no one talks about that. And then its failure to be fiscally responsible, you know, to be spending what we're spending right now, it's just insane. You know,
It's
we're
spending-
borrowing money to give it to other nations, I mean, that's just, that alone is just completely insane. And that also Congress regularly oversteps its constitutional authority.
Yeah.
That
they're involved in things that they were never supposed to be involved in.
Yes, and one of the things specifically is with the education. So, you know, we have all these agencies, and, you know, one that I'm particularly focused on right now is the Department of Education.
Yeah.
They're all unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Because all of these things are state responsibilities, and we have all those same agencies in every state. So not only is it duplicative, but it's not their place to regulate those things at the state level, which they do from a federal position. The states were always designed to be sovereign, and on purpose, that each state is different. New York, the needs and the wants and the issues in New York are different than they are in Montana.
Yeah, if you don't like the way things are in one state, move to another
Right.
state.
That was the beauty of it, that we'd
Yeah.
all be one nation, but yet separate individual sovereign states. And that's disappearing. And of course, it's failure to secure the border. That's one of its main responsibilities, that it actually is supposed to be doing, constitutionally. Then the unelected bureaucrats that actually create the legislation, it's not really our legislators doing it anymore. The behind-the-scenes bureaucrats are doing it, and the legislators rubber stamp it.
Can't even read the bills.
Yeah,
Before they
exactly.
come up to vote, they're 3,000 pages, they never read any of it.
Yeah, and they have, 2 hours to read it or something, maybe
Yeah.
not that much, but they have a day to read like a 3,000-page bill.
None of them read it.
Yeah. And then that they suppressed the domestic energy production.
Yeah.
And this is what's caused all this inflation, basically. It all goes back to that.
Yeah, and it's a security issue.
Yeah.
We're dependent on our enemies now.
Yeah.
Yeah, this legislation is badly needed,
Oh, it definitely is.
I want to clear that up. This is not, the Convention of States does not have a proposed legislation.
Oh.
We are simply,
Proposal.
our proposal is to hold a Convention of States. We want to start a dialogue. We do not have legislation that we want to promote. We have issues that interest the American people to take part in their government. This convention will produce the legislation that will have to be voted on. We want to have that dialogue. We want every American involved. It's an educational process for all Americans to understand their responsibility to look into the matters of government and decide for themselves what is right and what is wrong. And that's our whole position. We're nonpartisan. We're not beholden to any individual. We have notable individuals within our organization that have a lot of good ideas. But until the convention actually takes place, it's all a proposal. And that's what comes out of the convention, is a proposal. Do the American people want this particular amendment, as it comes out of the convention, to be legislation that they will live under? And that's the ratification process.
All right, well, let me ask you a question then, both of you. The proposal, is it the same for all the states?
Yes. It's not really a proposal. We call it a resolution,
Okay,
because it's not a bill. A bill would require the governor's signature. A resolution does not. So even the governor has nothing to do with it. It's just the two houses. And so the resolution just asks that we want to be able to have this convention of states where only 3 particular topics are in discussion. And that would be fiscal restraints, term limits for Congress and bureaucrats, and then curbing federal overreach. So those are the only 3 areas that can be addressed. And every resolution has
That's
to say the
everything.
same thing. So in order to aggregate, the 19 that we have so far, some of the language may differ, but that part has to be in every state's resolution, or it can't be part of the, aggregate with the other states.
when did the resolution start?
Well, the organization started in 2013, 2014.
So it was sent out to all the states in 2013?
It doesn't go out like that. It's each individual state. So this, I'll get into a little bit of that, of how exactly we do what we do.
Yeah,
So there's 2 different arms, so to speak. We have the grassroots arm, we have the legislative arm. And so in order for a state to become passed, so to speak, they've passed a resolution and they've joined the other states, it has to go through the legislature. They have to vote yes on it. So normally what you do is you build the grassroots organization first. You get volunteers, people who are going to educate the people, and who are going to, bring on volunteers. We have to build the numbers of people plus the petitions. The petitions are basically the leverage that, that gets the legislators to listen to us. Because the more petitions, then they know that, their constituents are in favor of it, so they have to pay attention.
Mhm.
And then the other side of it is the legislative side. So we also have to then reach out to the legislators, see where they stand. Do they need more information? Are they on board? Are they dead against? So that we can start to formulate a plan. then we can file a resolution, and it's different in every state, with whatever committee is set up for that intention. In Connecticut, it's called GA&E, or the Government Administration and Elections Committee. So we file it with them, and then they decide whether they're gonna take it up or not. And if they decide to take it up, and then there would be hearings and testimonies and things like that. And then there would be a floor vote in the House. If it's approved in the House, then it goes to the Senate.
What if this committee decides not to take it up? Would you go to another committee?
Every state has a process, so there are rules we have to follow.
You can
So
only submit this to this one
Yes.
committee?
it's different everywhere. You know, in Massachusetts, they actually got the committee to take it up. So they passed a resolution to add a committee in Massachusetts. But they went through the Veterans Committee, and that's where legislation goes, so of this type. You know, it depends on the type of legislation. So the legislation of this type in Connecticut goes through GA&E.
Well, how receptive is this GA&E committee in Connecticut to
At this point, not very. So we haven't actually successfully filed the resolution in Connecticut yet. We are the only state, which is a shame, the Constitution state.
Oh.
But they haven't, sometimes the language isn't the way it's supposed to be, or they just don't take it up. We've tried several times. So we think that next year we will be able to get it successfully filed with the legislation in there, the language in there, I mean. And we have, some sponsors and co-sponsors that we're working with to do that.
Well, are you doing anything? I mean, are you, the names of the people on this committee, are you publicizing the names so people can write to these people?
Yes.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay, that's on your website?
Not exactly. So the way that works is that when you go to contact your legislator, there's a website you would go to figure out who it is, first of all. And that would be ct.cga.gov. So that's the CTA's Connecticut General Assembly. And then you would put in your address, and then it would direct you to your representative. So majority of people are only contacting their own representative. So but we do target the
Why wouldn't
districts.
you do both? Why wouldn't you go directly to the people on this committee?
Well, that's what I'm saying. We do target the GA&E committee districts, more than the rest of the state. But the whole state's got to be educated and aware, at least, of what's going on, so that when this happens, because it is happening, we're not giving up. This convention will happen. Whatever comes out that needs to be ratified, the state, the people in the state, the constituents have to know what's going on. So we have to educate the people and the legislators.
So will this be a vote of the legislature
Yes.
in Connecticut?
Yep.
It won't be on the ballot for people?
No, I know, I wish that were the case. We'd have a better chance. But yes, the legislators, because they're the ones, that's their job. They're the ones that have to do it.
Well, wouldn't it be a good idea if it was on the ballot, just as a question?
I mean, that's a good thought. I don't know that that's something we can do. Do you have any idea about that?
Well, I don't think it would hurt to include the public in the decision-making process. And when the 18th Amendment was repealed by the 21st Amendment, Congress decided that they would not use the legislatures, but rather that they would use conventions within the states whereby people within the states were elected to consider the 21st Amendment and decide whether or not they wanted to ratify it. So they did hand it over to the people. And it is possible that whatever comes out of this convention could be handled in such a fashion that now all the states hold conventions within the states that they're people. So it has to be a decision by the people. Even the legislators are going to follow the people when it comes to the numbers involved in wanting this. And that's what's most important to us, is the people have to want this. We tell people, you're not going to get an issue outside of the three that we want to deal with. A lot of gun rights people say, we're opening up the Constitution and they're going to take away our gun rights. Well, it's out of order. It's not part of the resolution, and it's out of order. It's not an issue that has been approved by all 34 states, so therefore it's not an issue to be taken up by the convention. Precedent holds that they follow the order, and that's what we're all about. That we want the people to be able to make the decision. Now, whether or not they hold conventions, that's up to the state legislators.
Yeah, I know last year during the election, there was a question on the ballot about early voting, all right? And it got passed overwhelmingly down in Guilford, and I think in all Connecticut, it got passed overwhelmingly. But I would think a question like that about the convention of states would be very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have a position on the team called a legislative liaison, and he works directly with the legislators. So I think we'll put that question to him, because I'm not really sure how you would go about getting it as a question on the ballot. But I think that's something that you should definitely look into. I mean, it certainly could help promote the awareness,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then let them see how many people vote yes.
Find out how that question got on and just follow the same,
Yeah.
the same process.
Well, that's considering that it has a positive outcome. The legislation to put to make the change that we recently had did not include details. Should we have early voting? And then the
Well, yeah.
legislature took over and put a 10-day earliness, which none of the state registrars of voters was prepared for. And it's a financial burden on all of the communities to do this. So just getting it on a ballot like that, it has to be more specific, because if we leave it open-ended, we can count on legislature that would not be so agreeable, and sometimes, in most cases. We have to be careful. It's a double-edged sword. We like the idea of asking the people, but it's how you structure the question to get the answer that you want.
I don't see how anybody could be against this. It's just a convention to decide if you're gonna propose amendments to the
Well,
Constitution.
there are
Thank you.
people against it, and that is because of people who want to keep things the way they are, the people who are actually, in politics for the money and are lining their pockets. They don't want anything to change, and so they spread misinformation, and that's what happens. I think the average citizen who is not for this has listened to all of the misinformation, and it's hard to find that out. Sometimes we have, people who volunteer to join us and then they just disappear. And I often wonder, did they hear something, some misinformation about us, but they don't come and tell us that and let us, straighten it out. And so, the runaway convention, that's the biggest one. You're gonna open up the Constitution. Some people even say that we, as Convention of States, have a whole new Constitution ready to go.
How would delegates to this convention, if it occurs, be chosen
It's different, each state decides how they choose their
in
delegates.
Connecticut?
We don't have a process for that yet. That's normally decided, so far anyway, because I've watched a lot of committee hearings and, as the states are getting passed, and that's generally decided as part of the process of approving the resolution. Some states have an amendment, they put an amendment in there on how they'll choose the delegates, or there might be an amendment on what to do if there's unfaithful delegates, if they send people and they try to get other stuff in there. Stuff that's not part of the three topics. So that is individually done in each state and generally at the time that the hearings are going on.
Are you working on this at the same time? Language to decide how delegates from Connecticut will be chosen?
I don't know that we'll have a say in that.
If not us, who?
Well, as far as that's something that the representatives and
Yeah, but they're supposed to have nothing to do with this.
no, in the state ones,
Yeah,
they are the ones who have to do
You're
this.
talking about the state legislatures,
Yes.
and we have considered what other states have done, and we want to follow the good examples that we get from them and avoid some of maybe the pitfalls.
well, for example, I was a delegate to the Republican convention at Foxwoods last year. All right, my first time. But how did I get chosen to be an org? I went to the Republican town committee meeting, and whoever showed up could place their names in nomination, and then whoever was there just voted on it. So, I mean, this could be co-opted. It could be co-opted so that people that were against this could become delegates, So it's worth thinking about, and at the same time that we're doing all the other stuff to make sure this goes smoothly.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. Is that some states may send people. I mean, I think the 34 states that it takes to get the convention, to make it happen. based on the fact that they would have gone through their, the approval process in the House and the Senate, and that they voted yes on it, I feel fairly secure that they would send faithful delegates, people who are gonna represent their state on those topics. It may not be what we want, but that's okay. You know, we're not necessarily trying to change, you know, quote, blue states into red states. What we want is everything to be decided at the state level. So broadly, the idea is to bring the power back to the states. Each state can be who they want to be. But now when they go to convention, the first thing, that we had a simulated convention, we've had two already, one back in 2016, and we just did one this year.
That's good.
And what they did, the first thing they do is the rules committee gets together and they set the rules. So they choose a president, and you know all the different positions are filled, and they decide what the rules are. Now anything that is proposed that goes against the rules is out of order. And so even if there's bad actors who don't like what we want, you know, as far as what we're promoting, and they want to do other stuff, it can't really go anywhere because it would be considered out of order. You know, and then at the end, the way it worked is they broke into committees, you know, in the 3 topics, and they came up with proposals, and they actually came up with 6 really good ones, considering they had one day to discuss it. They all took it very seriously. There's some really great like summary videos, you know, there's a few interviews with some of the delegates that went there, and then there's some of the, you know, of the people that, you know, our representatives that ran the simulation talking about it. But basically, it went great. It went great. Nobody tried to do anything funny, and they really took it seriously. They came up with, I mean, they were debating language. You know, should this word be, or should we say these or those, that kind of stuff. They were really serious about it. And so we hope that gives people the hope and the belief that this would not go sideways.
Yeah, I imagine all the proposed amendments would be worked on before they even went to the convention. And just say, you know, here, everybody has their own proposal, and you just get together and work it out. No?
No.
No.
We don't have, like Bill was saying before, we don't have proposals. We have ideas. We know what needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
But we don't have proposals on how to fix them. That's not part of what we promote. You know, internally, there are people who have ideas, but this is just, you know, our personal ideas. And so we actually submitted them all to national. Like all of us got to submit different ideas we had for amendments, just for them to get an idea of what we think. But they're called commissioners. They're delegates, but they call them commissioners. So the commissioners will go there and hash out the issues and decide what's the best way, you know, to proceed. So, for instance, a term limits amendment. They explained a little bit at the end when they did the final voting of some of the things that were discussed and how they got to what they got to. Because it wasn't probably as small term limits as most people would have liked. They ended up with 12 years in each house. So you could have 6 terms as representatives, 2 years each, or 2 terms as a senator, 6 years each. But only, let's say you go from the House to the Senate, the total is 24. So you can't go further than that by going from a House representative to a senator.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people are like, you know, but
It's better than it is now.
exactly, that cuts a lot of people's time in Congress in half. You know, people that are 45, 50 years. So it has to be something that solves the issue, but that what people will accept. So a lot of people wouldn't accept the smaller ones. There are people who feel that term limits limit their ability to vote for who they want. You know, suppose it's some guy and he's doing really great and they want to vote for him. You know, I understand that, but you have to weigh that against what happens when someone's there too long. You know, and plus there's plenty of other. And the way the founders looked at this was a calling. It was something you did for a short period of time, then you went back to your life. This was never meant to be a career. So that's another way you have to look at it. So the term limits, you know, would serve to bring that more into the original intent.
You touched my heart when you said smoothly. That would be wonderful. However, history has shown that it was never smooth.
No.
And it will not be smooth. And we'd be naive to think of that way.
One of my favorite movies, a musical, was 1776, and the process that they went through and the difficulties. Yeah.
We're answering some of the difficulties that they had at that time. Again, there were 55 delegates who were assigned to this. Yes, Patrick Henry who was governor of Virginia at the time, says, "I smell a rat." He never attended, right from the onset. And the Anti-Federalists, many of them dropped away. Many of them dropped away. However, Elbridge Gerry and George Mason were Anti-Federalists. They gave us Article 5, second clause, because they could foresee, they looked ahead. The process that they came up with of ratifying the Constitution was placed into the hands of the people. They decided that the Articles of Confederation were decided upon by the legislatures of the states. But when it came to the Constitution, there was a resolution from the convention. There were 3 letters from the convention. Three issues from the convention. One was the Constitution itself. The second was a resolution of transition, ratification and transition, that all the states had to agree that they would accept the verdict of 9 states to ratify it, and thereby it becomes a constitution. And only the states that ratify it would be subject to that constitution. They satisfied the requirement of the Articles of Confederation, which said that all 13 states have to be unanimous in their agreement before any changes could occur to the Articles of Confederation. And so that was March of 1788, that all 13 states agreed that they would accept that resolution, that the ratification would be by 9 states. And then it wasn't until the following June that New Hampshire became the 9th state to finally accept it or ratify it, and thereby it became the Constitution for the United States. So the acceptance of the constitutional requirement under the Articles of Confederation that all states be unanimous in this procedure, they were all unanimous in it. We're facing the lies that came out. You know, there were Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers issued at that time because they had to inform the people about what the Constitution contained and whether or not it was good for it. And you had both sides in the news articles, in the papers. That's because the thing that came out of the convention was that was one convention that produced 13 conventions. They said that it would not be the legislatures that approved this Constitution, but it would be the conventions of the people. So within all 13 states, there were conventions held by people who were elected by the population to represent them in that delegation within their convention. In Connecticut, we had 168 delegates. Out of that 168 delegates, 142, I believe it was, agreed to ratify the Constitution, and there was 40 that rejected it.
Wow.
There were nationwide, there was 1,068 delegates. 1,048 approved the Constitution. 580 denied it. So it was decided by the people that this Constitution would be good for the United States. And that was a convention of people within each state. So that one convention was sent to the legislature at the time under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation approved the resolution process, they approved that, but they made no decision on the Constitution itself. That was then put into the hands of the people within the states to elect their own people to represent them in a convention format and decide for themselves. So the convention format is not as familiar to us today as it was in those days, but that's not to mean that it won't work for us today, and we believe it will.
So, we discussed that this should be a bipartisan issue, but what's your experience as far as Democrat or Republican support for this in Connecticut?
I would say that in Connecticut, it's not just the representatives and the senators themselves, but I think leadership, people in leadership position are not, pushing this. We haven't really been successful in getting the, whether they support or not from every representative. There's 151 House districts. That's what we focus on first. And I think that there's a lot of, especially Republican or conservative, however you want to word that, representatives who are not against it. They might be in favor of it, but they're not willing to go public about it. They want to make sure they win elections, and they realize that a lot of their constituents, may not agree and that kind of thing. So that's kind of been an obstacle, is getting people who, when we talk to them, they think it's a great idea, but they won't put it in their platform, they won't sign on as a co-sponsor, they're not that in favor.
That is disturbing, that
It is.
people won't come out and declare where they are on this. Something as obvious as this.
It's
Yeah.
not as obvious to everybody. We've been talking about a political structure that people tend to ignore until it impacts them. The Democratic way is the majority wins. But we don't have a democracy. We have a constitutional republic. We have representatives, and we have a constitution which says this is the law of the land, this is the way it should be done. And we're moving away from the constitutional approach. We have a copy of the Constitution that's very thin. You can read the whole thing in 45 minutes. But what the federal government is following is what we call a courtstitution. It's the large 3,000-page document that the court says this is the Constitution. So they're looking at all the nuances and stretched interpretations that the court has placed upon the Constitution to say this is okay and that's not okay. They've been looking at those decisions by the court as though it were the constitutional word, and in many cases it wasn't. Dred Scott case in particular precipitated the Civil War, antagonized millions of people throughout the country, and helped actually produce the war. Decisions like that. Decisions in 1892 where Jim Crow laws were upheld. And it wasn't until 1954 that they overturned their own decision. The Supreme Court has had a role detrimental to the freedoms of American people. And it's only growing. We're not able to make those kind of changes. Term limits would help. Term limits on Supreme Court justices, federal justices, term limits. Let's move them in a position where working for us is more important to their legacy than lifetime appointments, which is to their advantage.
Easier said than done.
Obviously.
Yes, we can attest to that.
Well, how can people help? Well, what can people do to push this forward?
There's a few different things. So the first thing is get involved in whatever level you can. So many people have busy lives, especially in the economy we have. There are people that work 2 and 3 jobs. So having time to actually physically volunteer might be challenging. But I'll give you some ideas of things they could do. So if you actually really, sometimes saying I don't have the time is, more of just kind of putting it off. But if you really don't have a lot of time, we have a program we just came up with called the 15-Minute Patriot. And this is not 15 minutes a day or 15 minutes a week, it's 15 minutes a month. So I think everybody could find 15 minutes a month. And then there's a list of things you could do in 15 minutes. You could call your legislator, you could write them a letter. You could get 5 people to sign the petition. There's things you can do, and you don't have to actually join the team to do that. You can just be a supporter.
Letter to the editor of the paper.
Exactly, yes. And then we have, volunteers. We definitely need volunteers. 151 House districts. And we have volunteers pretty much in every district, but not leadership. And that's where that district captain role comes in. So we definitely need more of that. We need more district captains, because they're the ones who would be actively developing their own district. Getting more petitions signed, bringing more volunteers on, reaching out to the legislators.
Well, let me ask you a question about petitions. Is this all an online thing, or is this a paper thing?
It's both.
It's
You can
both.
go to the website. It's www.conventionstates.com, and you click on the Take Action tab, and then there you'll find all the different roles that we have available for you to apply for. Then you fill out your application. Someone will contact you, and then you're on the team and doing what you need, what we need, I should say. And we also we outreach a lot. So we do fairs and festivals. We set up a table, and we invite people over to hear about it. A lot of people don't know about it. I think when I started here 5 years ago, it was very rare that I would ask someone, "Have you heard of us?" and they would say yes. And I think the first time that someone said yes, I was speechless for a second. I said, "You have?" But now it's much more common. Sometimes people come right over and they're looking for the petition.
Well, do you have in mind, you have a figure in mind, how many people you need to sign these petitions to?
There's no magic number. It's just the more the better. You know, in some, and it's district by district, you know, so some districts there are some districts that have way more petitions, and so more leverage with that legislator, where others, you know, have less, so it's, you know, not as convincing, so to speak.
I used to be a salesman, right? And when my customers, they were trying to decide how much you should buy, I always told them more is better.
Exactly.
That's what I told them. Okay, so we got the petitions. They can go on the website and sign up to volunteer.
Mhm.
Anything else?
Well, since we are nonprofit, they're always looking for financial help.
Donation.
So if you can donate, I mean, any amount is good. You know, we don't take.
So it's tax deductible, the donation?
I'm not sure about that.
Nonprofit, which should be.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not really sure about that, because there's two organizations really, there's the foundation, Convention of States Foundation, and they handle fundraising, and then there's Convention of States Action, and that's us, and we can't do fundraising, we can only lobby, you know, so I'm not that familiar with that.
501c3,
And a 501c4,
Okay,
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, so, you know, I don't know that much about it, but I know that, you know, a lot of people accuse us of taking, you know, dark money and stuff like that, and that is just completely false. Most of it comes from small donations from people, you know. And we do have some large donors, but, you know, not these like PACs and things like that, you know.
Well, you're doing God's work. I give you all the credit in the world, and I'm going to do the best I can to help you, and I'm glad you came here today. And anything else you want to
Yeah,
say?
I'd like to say that we are offering an education on the Constitution from our perspective, of course, of Article 5. But we've also partnered with another group called Patriot Academy that offers constitutional courses, Constitution Alive. You go to Patriot Academy, you can sign up for it, it's free, it's a Zoom call, and you can see their programs which illustrate for you the formation of the Constitution, how it was structured, what it means, and how you can understand it better. It's not a dry classroom type situation. It's lighthearted, but it's serious. And we offer, that's through Patriot Academy. We're partnered with the Convention of States, and it's well worth a person's time to learn more about it. Because when people come to us, they say, what do I know about government? I haven't, a resolution? What do they know about a resolution? Most people don't grasp these things. They don't speak that language. And these classes help them understand how it all fits into their daily life. That's what we want to bring to people, an education that improves their quality of understanding their government and will affect the quality of their life.
I'm actually glad that he mentioned that, because I did forget to mention, and this is sometimes what stop people from getting involved, they don't know.
Mhm.
We have unbelievable training in our organization, so we don't expect you to just come in and know what to do. You know, we have online courses, we call it COS University. We have training and mentoring from your state team, which will be myself and our grassroots coordinator. And then National provides weekly training webinars. So we train you everything you need to know. You don't have to worry about what you don't know.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I mean, when I think of learning about the federal government, I think of places like Hillsdale College
Yes.
that has
Excellent
free
program.
courses.
And they're excellent. But this is a little different. These are just, you know, video modules that you watch, the ones at COS University. And they're set up for busy people. You can watch the whole thing right through, but they're in separate modules, so you complete one at a time. Each one is maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
Are you pushing these instructions to schools? Or
We are getting involved now in schools. We have a volunteer that just joined us recently who was already, this is a funny story also, you know, she was distraught, and she already knew all about Article 5 and had been talking about it, not knowing that we even existed. And she kept praying that there was some group of people somewhere doing this. And we were at a fair in Shelton, and she saw us. And she said, and I thought to myself, there they are. So, but she has small children, and she's very, very interested in all the issues going on in the schools. So there's the two sides of it. There's, you know, educating kids and making sure they're learning about the Constitution. And then there's trying to get in there and get rid of all this garbage that they're filling their heads with.
yeah, I know in Guilford they have a superintendent of assistant superintendent of curriculum, but I imagine each town has one of these people.
Mhm.
So it'd probably be worthwhile to contact these people and see if you can get it into the school system. Because who knows what they're learning in school
Exactly.
anymore.
And also Patriot Academy.
Yes.
You want to mention that? Yeah.
Yes, Rick Green helped enact legislation called Constitution Day, September 17th, I believe it is, where any school collecting federal funds is obligated to teach about the Constitution. And Patriot
At least
Academy
on that day.
has and Patriot Academy has produced a program that can be shown on that day, which is faithful to the Constitution as it was intended. And we want to get that program into the schools, but it's tough because, like you say, there's a person standing there who makes a decision.
Well, if you don't swing the bat, you don't get it.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
right,
we haven't had anyone, we're stretched kind of thin. I mean, we have over 100 volunteers, but not everybody is really active, so there's probably a good, maybe 20 of us that are kind of always there, always do what needs to be done, but we're all stretched thin. So as much as we want to get into the schools and address that, hasn't really been anybody who could do it, but now we have this new lady, Sherry her name is, and this is all she's passionate about. I mean, obviously the whole movement, but so we're really hopeful that we can take this program from Patriot Academy and implement it in schools. She has connections already because she's been working on it. So.
Well, it's so important. I know I'm involved locally here in Guilford in the issues that are going on here. But when you read these national surveys where only 40% of the kids are proud of their country, I mean, this has to be addressed. I mean, we've got to change the situation somehow, and I think that would be a good way to do it.
Absolutely, I agree.
Okay, well, thank you for coming today. I learned a lot, and I'm sure what you said will resonate with anybody that watches this, and we're gonna circulate it far and wide. And
Wonderful.
thank you to Guilford Public TV for letting us do this interview. They've been terrific, and thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, yes.